So for beers that we want to be consistent, we have an isolated yeast strain that we use that gives us consistent results. So it allows us to make a beer that can be the same pretty much as the last beer, but it takes a lot of work still to make it in terms of beer in the same framework, but I'd never done that before. So you can imagine getting to 30 odd years of life drinking beer.
What was your hurdles? Like, how did you overcome that? Because you must have needed some financial beginnings of some sort. You needed a location, you needed the equipment. So it can't have been a cheap.
Bought most of it and gave it out to their customers as a Christmas present, in their little hamper. So, when they might give them a bottle of beer and some cheese to all of their customers. If you're the sort of person who's helping your teammates out and you're, tidying up after somebody, or you're looking after what they need as well as, and they're looking after what you need, then we could automate the whole process and have, you can buy brew houses that, would mash in from, you can mash in from your iPhone. And
Good morning, Evin. Thank you for agreeing to come on the very first podcast for the London Food Network with me, Sebastian. So I mean, I was really keen to speak to you, Evin. As I mentioned before, I really find your business fascinating, and I love the way that you've grown it and your kind of journey from what I understand, which is very little, of course. And I really wanted to dive into, well, the beginnings, or even before the beginnings of the Kernel Brewery, and what journey you've had, and kind of where you are now. So I guess my first question, Evin, is what sparked your journey from cheese making before, right? Is that right?
Cheese selling. So I worked in your dairy as a cheesemonger. Mongering would be the technical term, yes.
So it's a bit of a transition, isn't it, from fermented cheese to, I guess, fermented hops. So what was kind of go with that?
Yeah, but you find a load of fermentation nerds like us who are kind of, all the same in different ways. That you can have, you can take your fermentation fascination and put it into coffee, into cocoa, into kombucha, into making sourdough, into cheese, into beer. And so they all have enough in common that if fermentation is something that you're interested in,
Right.
that is actually applicable across so many of the foodstuffs we eat. So many of those things that people have real cravings for are fermented, and then I know most of what you work with is fresh, but there are types of fermented fish out there, various different cultures that are amazing and completely mind-blowing. And
Absolutely. So that, I'll take it, that's always been your fascination, the fermentation of food.
I suppose because there is, I think what's really fascinating about fermentation is that I suppose in certain subjects you want to be, there's an idea of becoming a master at something, becoming really good at something, becoming, a professional. And there's an idea of kind of control of situations and being able to master all of the, the possible things that come your way. Whereas when you're working with fermentation, you take a step back from that control and you let all of the wild yeast and the commercial yeast and the microbes and the bacteria, they do the thing. You don't actually do that thing. They do it. So the product that ends up is not actually completely under your control. You kind of try and set up the conditions for something to work.
Yeah.
And you can become very good at that. Obviously when we make beer, we want it to be consistent. We don't want it to be random and higgledy-piggledy and some good batches and some bad batches. So we do spend a lot of effort to control fermentations. But in essence, fermentations are done by the yeast. So you're kind of just feeding them.
But presumably the yeast is...
I suppose for me, this is what kind of differentiates a craft from, I don't know. I think the craft aspect of it means you always are acting in collaboration with somebody. So in this case, as somebody who works with fermentation, you're always working with the yeast. We're basically yeast farmers.
But
if you look at it another way.
Like, do you buy the yeast in, or is this something you actually create from scratch and then you kind of...
That's different for different things. Yeah.
There are different...
Yeah. There are different types of beers. Yeah. And again, across all the other fermentations we're talking about, there's huge differences. So for beers that we want to be consistent, we have an isolated yeast strain that we use that gives us consistent results. So it allows us to make a beer that can be the same pretty much as the last beer, but it takes a lot of work still to make it, that whole system. But yes, we have wild yeast that we've, just spontaneously isolated or invited into the brewery, invited into the beer. If we're making a fruit beer, there'll be wild yeast on the fruit, wild yeast in the honey, et cetera, et cetera. So there are definitely ways of, there's not a yes or a no. There's all the spectrum of choices in between as to what you want to do. But we've gone actually really strangely technical at the beginning rather than historical. But that's also fine.
But one thing about what you touched on, actually, I didn't think about, but like what you said, I guess makes total sense. So you kind of started in cheese, and I guess the fascination in cheese is similar, like you say. Absolutely, it's a very similar
Yeah.
cues, isn't it? Since
And then so in it, just even the simplistic way of looking at it, cheese, you take a liquid and ferment it into a solid.
yeah,
And beer is just simply the reverse. You take a solid, which in this case is barley, the source of sugar, and you just turn it into a liquid, ferment it the other way around. The results are different, obviously. Cheese is a food stuff, whereas obviously the fermentation with the yeast that produce alcohol is it's the alcohol that changes where it fits in culture, I suppose. So there's a whole other conversation about how alcohol fits in, which is not the same thing as the fermentation into a food stuff, is it?
yeah.
But that's another story.
Well,
But I suppose to go back to what your first
yeah. How did you end up? What is it that got you from cheese to beer? I guess what is it that kind of.
The short version of the story is, so I had been working for Neal's Yard Dairy for 7 years, and then I'd left Neal's Yard and was running a friend's cheese stall in the Borough Market. And so I was just selling Corwith Caerphilly for my friend Todd. Just one cheese, one stall, one cheese. It was absolute perfection. You don't need any. Yeah, it's great. And it was, this was in 2005, 2006. So the Borough Market was still somewhere that worked at the market. It's become so busy and so popular these days that it's actually hard to sell things there anymore because there's almost too many people. And there's also loads of other good markets now around London. So it doesn't have the same place in London's kind of culinary constellations.
Yeah.
But because I'd left Neal's Yard, because I didn't work there anymore, I was actually quite useful to them as a kind of a consultant, so they sent me on a number of jobs. Like I got sent to Hong Kong for a couple of weeks to open a cheese shop there. I got sent to New York for a month and a bit to help Whole Foods. So one of their big customers over there at that time was Whole Foods.
Really?
So we're opening a cheese shop in Manhattan, in the Lower East Side, New York. And they sent me over there for a month to show the Americans how to run a cheese shop. And that was a bit of a disaster. The cheese shop didn't last very long. Nothing to do with me. They got me in too late. They designed the whole thing really badly, and it would just kill cheese. It was a room in which cheese went to die.
Right.
That's a shame. But they built it all by the time I got there. So I was just, I was doing more training with the staff and stuff like that. So, I would go in and, tell them about the historical recipes of this cheese, the breed of cows they were used, the name of the farmer, what the other similar cheeses are, what why they might make these decisions, what sort of pastures and grass or hay the animals might be eating, how this affects the cheese, how the affinage affects it, all of these things. And I just had this vivid memory of, them taking me out for a beer after work. There was a bar happened to be called DBA's, it was a couple of blocks away. And then the guys I was teaching would just sit me down and go, well, here's this India Pale Ale from this brewer made to this sort of recipe. And this guy makes another IPA, but it's made to a different style. And here's what he's trying to do. And this one is made with this sort of hops. And this one is, and everything, just the way my brain worked in terms of cheese, I could suddenly fit all of these things in terms of beer in the same framework, but I'd never done that before. So you can imagine getting to 30 odd years of life, drinking beer. You grew up in Ireland, beer it's not quite religious, but it's close. Same in this country, in the UK, the pub is drinking beer. It's so much part of our heritage that we don't think about it. It's just there, as you become 18, you go to the pub with your mates, that's how we exist. That's how we grow up here. And so I'd never given beer any thought. And then somebody, suddenly this trip to the States, it was like, oh, well, you can think of beer in exactly the same way as you think of cheese. And then you realize, actually, I'd been thinking about wine that way already before, because wine already fit in with food in that way. With wine, you'd already know grape varieties. You know what goes with what food. You know a few famous producers. It kind of fit into that whole way of thinking. So for me, working with cheese, it just meant that the moment was quite quick. I didn't once you had those bits of knowledge, they fit into a framework that allowed you to understand how it worked culturally, historically, and that was fascinating. And on that same trip, like, you know, a couple of days later in the same pub, it was like, oh, so why is nobody doing this back in the UK?
But it's funny. So
And that's what led to the brewery.
movement started in America then. So what you're saying is the
Yes.
craft, really? See,
Mhm.
because I actually never thought of America as, I don't know, a kind of beer drinking,
Yeah.
at least not this kind of craft side of beer. You know, you think America, you think Budweiser, you think, you know, don't know, kind of,
Yes.
the more
Yeah.
Never
But the
think.
thing is that, but I mean, the one thing that does is that it just means the landscape of Budweiser drinking is so homogenous that, you know, it's basically just crying out for somebody to do something else,
Yeah.
you know. And because America didn't have maybe its own drinking tradition apart from these sort of big lagers, I mean, one of the great things America has always been good at is, you know, just taking things from the other cultures of people who go and live there. So, you know,
Yeah.
we have our British drinking tradition, and that, you know, gives us certain historical expectations of what beer should be. But obviously the Germans, you know, the German tradition in America, there's the Czech tradition, there's Belgian traditions, there's English traditions, and the Americans would just, you know, take all of this and just take the bits they want, mash it all together, create something new. And so the innovations that the Americans, you know, the first American craft brewers came up with were, you know,
They were able to see beer in a different way than us Europeans, I think, because they weren't tied to the same history that we were, which is kind of the story of America in a sense anyway. But yes, craft beer in the modern sense of a brewery like ours is in many ways an American invention.
Wow.
And at that point in time, 2005.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never in a million years actually thought that. I thought that European thing, because you know, I've been to Bruges, for example, before, and there's a famous pub there with, I don't know how many types of all kinds of
So where?
in Bruges.
Yeah.
There's a place there where you go in, and you know, it's got like something like 2,500.
Oh yeah. There's
Just in one place, you know. So I've always, and this is like 20 odd years ago I went there. So yeah, I've always thought of it as a very European thing, actually, this kind of stuff.
no, I mean, so yes, all of those traditions have existed in Europe, but in most situations, they're just thought of as old man drinks and kind of slightly old-fashioned and out of touch. What the American craft beer movement, I suppose, modernized it to make it more interesting or more relevant, more, something that appeals more to a modern palate, I suppose. You could also call it more hyped, more marketed, more bullshit, more, all of those things come together. But those beers already existed. I suppose there's just a way of building a brewery, building a community around a brewery, which is kind of a specifically American invention at this point.
Yeah. You come back from America and you've got all these ideas and you've had this epiphany, I guess, and from your point of view, because your brain, like you say, was already functioning in this kind of like, I guess, complex, well, maybe not complex to you, but complex to anybody else, way of thinking about the fermentation of and on all the kind of recipes and creations. And anyway, so you come along and if that the pennies dropped and thought, oh wow, so I can actually create essentially my own craft beers with a similar process to what I've been learning for the last X amount of years with the cheese side of things. So it kind of seemed, I guess, an obvious transition, or at least a less daunting transition, perhaps. I don't know.
No, it's pretty daunting. I think when you, but I mean, when like when we talk about fermentation, you are relying on the yeast to do something, but I mean, it was never a process that you could assume that you could do well.
Sure.
So having the idea was one thing, but then it was like, okay, but how do you make beer? And does this work, And, my dad used to homebrew when I was a teenager.
Oh, yeah?
There were bottles exploding in the cupboard and undrinkable piss coming out the other end. Just stench of crap. Like it's really easy to, and there's so much bad beer out there as well. That's the other thing. It's kind of like, there's less now, actually. There's definitely a lot less bad beer out there. But, it's not a given. There's lots of things that are really boring and bland, or there are lots of things that are just not very good. And trying to understand, well, what makes that one? Why do I like that beer? What makes it good? What are the things that are done there that aren't done over here? Like with any situation, that the amount of information is it is a bit daunting.
So how did you make that? So how did you go? Well, because that's a key point there, because you've gone from essentially an employee to then venturing out, and that decision is a decision that I think holds back so many people, because like you said, everyone has great ideas, but the actual execution of it is really where where I guess it all actually happens. Ideas are just, everyone has ideas, but actually coming through with the confidence and the ability to set it up is what sets everybody apart from, I guess, an entrepreneur and somebody with an idea. So what is it that pushed you to what was your thought process, I guess, at the time? And what was your hurdles? Like, how did you overcome that? Because you must have needed some financial beginnings of some sort. You needed a location, you needed the equipment. So it can't have been a cheap setup to start.
It was surprisingly cheap, surprisingly desperate. So after I left Neal's Yard Dairy, the cheese stall I was running in the Borough Market was an independent business.
Okay.
Although it bought cheese only from one supplier. But it was a business in the technical sense, but like it barely had rent.
Okay.
Bought one product, sold one product, and had one employee besides me, and we worked 2 days a week. So maybe I learned something along the way, but it was the easiest business you could imagine running ever.
Okay.
And it was pretty good.
Maybe it's smart. Maybe just smart. Maybe something.
Oh yeah. Oh no, there are certain scales that really work. So if you can, if you can work so when I was in college and writing a PhD and stuff like that, so that would keep me alive on the weekends. The market was only open Friday, Saturday.
Yeah.
It was quite easy to have enough time to do the rest of the other things. So and I kept that on when I opened the brewery for another 9 months, maybe a year, because the brewery was just starting.
The brewery. So walk me through that. You found a location, obviously, and what was that process? You found a location, or you worked somewhere with a friend? How did you?
So I spent a couple of years homebrewing. So while selling cheese, I would spend the rest of my time in the kitchen, just making 50 liters of beer at a time, which taught me a lot. I met up and helped founded some homebrew clubs in London, which are many of them are still, 2 of them are still going. They're really great. That's a whole other different world, but you do learn a lot about. We learned a lot there about tasting, about beers, and about flaws.
Developing. Is this a period where you were actually actively selling it as well, or you were just
No, just making beer,
right?
just to learn the process.
Running for 2 years. So
Yeah.
2-year period of essentially learning your craft, but without monetizing it. So you were just
Well, but homebrew, yeah, but you make a lot of beer. So it saves you buying beer in the shop. You make friends because you can give them beer. Maybe I sold a batch of beer to a friend having a party or something, so we can't really talk about that because that's definitely didn't happen. But I know it's like any fermentation is and working with any process of fermentation is so much to do with the experience that you have of how it's supposed to work. So the more fermentations you can watch, the more sensitive you get to the changes that are going on, because that's actually what you need to be able to do this thing well. So it's not like learning how to do it. It's becoming sensitive to the changes in temperature and the changes in pH or anything that you might change that might affect the end product. And because there are so many different changes, it's the amount of time that you have doing something. Yeah. Just you get a sensitivity to what's necessary. So that it's 2 years is actually not a long time at all. Especially since, what you're doing on a homebrew level is also maybe not necessarily comparable to how it might work on a commercial kit. Because, you're kind of basically brewing in plastic buckets under your kitchen table,
Yeah. Wow.
It kind of, the process is the same. It should work. But at the same time, it's not the same as having a stainless steel tank and a pump, in good and bad ways, I suppose. So I was
the home brewing. At what point did you, after this period of time where you've been testing different ways, you've been, kind of trying different things, probably failing here and there with this and that, and
correct. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure like any business, probably more failures than wins in the beginning. But at some point, I guess it all started coming together, and you started understanding better, like you say, the all the variables that come into play, and you start having a consistent product, right? I guess that's what happened. At some point, you were confident, and you were able to produce something that was consistent, and you were quite proud of.
No, it didn't work that way. No, each batch was the thing about homebrewing is you're never looking for consistency. You want to do something new every single time. So you'd have 100 different recipes. I mean, if I was scientific about it, you would do one recipe until you perfected it.
Right.
The problem with that is that if you change equipment, then that recipe has to change. So you can't really translate from one thing to another very easily. But homebrewers are usually like, so you'd brew a Belgian beer one day, a stout the next day, an IPA the next day, a barley wine the next day. You do some weird, crazy shit the next day. You throw some gooseberries in it the day after. And some of them would be great and some would be appalling. And hopefully you'd learn enough. Yeah, and there would be a few sort of pale ales that did get repeated more often because they were the sort of beers that people would enjoy drinking. They would be the sort of beers that maybe I enjoyed back in America. So yes, there is a little bit of refining of techniques and stuff like that going on, but it was definitely more slapdash than you present. It was not a linear process, but there were enough. I suppose what the important thing was, there were enough beers that felt good enough that you could go, okay, if you got given this in a pub or something, you would go, oh, that's nice, or at the minimum acceptable, and in some cases, oh, that's really good, or else it was just like, at least it's really interesting. Might not be delicious, but nobody's tried one of those before, and there's always that's a separate question, but there's always a market for interesting things.
But
not always my favorite category. The other thing that I suppose is actually quite important to mention is, because when I came back from America, I was really convinced that I hadn't seen any of this sort of beer in the UK. And after a bit of digging, and even in London, which is, obviously the center of, well, I suppose we in London like to think of ourselves as the center of everything here. There really wasn't much of what I had in mind as beer around. So the other thing that actually helped me was, like at that point, in 2007 is when Brewdog started. So that's when I was in the States. So coming back, and after a few months, I managed to, discover that there was this brewery in Scotland making American hop-forward beers. And the first time I, ordered some online, because obviously they were in Aberdeen and they didn't sell much beer at that time in London, there was a moment there of like, okay, somebody else has had the same idea and they've gone and fucking done it. And it was amazing. The beers they made then were amazing. And that was also quite important to me, because I was still wondering, why would nobody have done this? Why would nobody make beers like this? Well, what's wrong? Do English people just not like hops? Do they just want to drink cask bitter? Do they? And there were a few other breweries subsequently that I discovered that were making, sort of what we call modern hop forward beers, but they were harder to find, and maybe they were just more local or more cask focused or whatever. But to have some other breweries kind of that you felt understood that moment that you had when of trying to bring that particular flavor of beer over to the UK was actually quite important.
spurred you on to go from your kind of home kitchen to actually try and make it a viable business that's going to kind of grow into something that can actually provide a living?
So I suppose after homebrewing for a little bit, I'd be sharing beers with friends, getting lots of people to try them to see what they thought. At a certain point, Neil's Yard Dairy, who I used to work for, they had their arches in all of our arches where we are now, we're currently down on Druid Street. So about, half a kilometer west of where we are now, where you are now.
On Druid Street.
Yeah, Neil's Yard Dairy were down there, and they let us know basically that there was an arch had just come free next to them.
Okay.
And Yeah. So, yeah. You know the size of the arches, but they're slightly, the arch was great, but it was too big of a commitment
Yeah.
for a small startup business. So again, through the same networks and connections of friends through Neil's Yard and through the Borough Market, I ended up moving in there with Bill, who runs Cap Casing, and Elliot from the Ham and Cheese Company. So the three of us split that arch in three ways. So the backside facing Rope Walk was the brewery, and the middle third was um, Elliot had his parmesans and parma ham and mozzarella that was coming in, and then Bill was making cheese down the end as cap casing. So the three of us shared that space, which is great because not only did we share the rent and stuff, but we shared the setup and the digging the drains and the putting up stuff down and the kind of, and then you had somebody at least to bounce ideas off, because it can be pretty daunting dealing with a project like that if you don't. Those sort of projects are kind of more difficult to engage with, I find, because the making of something is, I can get my head around, but the project of fitting out a factory, I suppose, is it's quite daunting.
And did you have consultants or something that how did you figure out what to use and how to set it up? And because like you say, I mean, I guess especially when you go on a commercial level with anything food, you've got then, I mean, maybe there wasn't so much legislation then, I don't know, but there's obviously, there's a lot of rules to follow. And I guess for you in particular with alcohol as well being made, there must have been a lot of regulation. There must have been a lot of kind of red tape, I guess, to kind of work your way through and how to make it safe and hygienic and
yeah, there's two separate questions there. The one about hygienic is, but actually having come from a food background, that's much easier because you've already done that. The HO coming in and checking your cheese making facility or your cheese shop, you learn really quickly, because the alcohol in beer protects it from becoming pathogenic. That you actually held to a lower standard, I suppose, in terms of tendiness than you would. Gee, that bit is easier if you've had training in food production. But yeah, the red tape in terms of alcohol and duty and bonded warehouse and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, there's more hurdles in terms of the selling. To go back to your question about consultants, no, I couldn't afford any. So, like, if you ask me the question now, would I have started a brewery the way I did? I would probably say no. But when you're ignorant of all the problems that you might face, you know that? Yeah. So I was completely ignorant of all these things, and we managed to get through, and everything was great and fine. But it could quite easily not have been. But because we were quite ignorant of the problems we might come across, it was just like, yeah, what the hell? Just go ahead and do it. So really, it was, yeah, we spent absolutely the bare minimum because that's all we had. It was just some money borrowed from my parents and some money from one close friend, while still working the cheese stall on the side.
Yeah.
And then, you're just relying on friends coming and helping out, So my friend Rob came down once a week and he'd spend the day bottling beer, You just give him some bottles to take home, and that was, and that would get you through. And then, different friends would turn up because people were excited.
So would you say you were one of the first? Because obviously what the location you're talking about, for people that don't know, is kind of became famously known as the Beer Mile, right? Which presumably is from when people like you started brewing within the arches, along the arches from essentially Borough Market or London Bridge, all the way into, I guess, now Spa Road, right? So were you the only one doing what you were doing? Were there other people doing it at the time?
No.
So you were the first.
I mean, not even.
You were the first one in this kind of like Beer Mile kind of.
Well, in London, I mean, after Brewdog, we're probably the next of the modern craft breweries in the UK in terms of age. There weren't any beers like let's say a modern IPA being made, apart from Thornbridge and Brewdog, through the whole country. Yeah, I mean, the whole of the Beer Mile is just people saw what we were doing and went, oh, that's great, let's do the same thing right next door.
Well, looking back now, how does that feel to to have been one of the very first kind of pioneers, I guess, or something that's become so notorious, really, not just in the beer mile or London or the UK, but in the world now. I think craft beer became just incredibly popular. It kind of exploded.
Well, yeah. I like your use of the word notorious, but specifically in terms of the beer mile, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I'm a bit ambiguous about it. It's a lot of people jumped on what they saw as a bandwagon. I mean, there's a couple of breweries who opened up nearby who specifically told me, "Oh, we're just coming down to jump on the bandwagon." It's like, great. So what are you bringing here? Nothing. What do you want? Oh, you want to take all of everything that's been built by other people on hard work? Because there are many breweries down there were great. Partisan, Brew by Numbers. They were breweries that were really cared about what they did, and they worked really hard to make really nice beers and build a proper business.
For you, when all of this exploded, right? Is it due to the financial success that you were having, or is this due to just simply it just created a creative kind of like hub, and you gave inspiration to people to think, oh shit, if he can do it, then I can do it. Look at was there? Was it a financial thing? Was it a creator's kind of flair that wanted to come along? What is it that created this? Because I mean, it's not usual to have something like this beer mile, right? It's not normal to have. Where else do you know of in the UK or even worldwide that you have this kind of like hub of specialist, very specific creators, if you like. What is it that it's like Silicon Valley. It brings in all the technical, and you got this.
Okay. So
You know,
So what you're describing as the beer mile, it could have been that way, but it wasn't. The beer mile itself is actually just more of a customer focused thing. So it's basically a beer festival every Saturday. If we all had to the same standards and all made really good beer, it would all be fine. But not everybody does that, and that's I mean, you can't control that. But it's the beer mile is something that yeah. So we opened in 2009. I think we first started selling beer from our arch in 2010. This is in Druid Street. And so we were open there for a couple of years. And this was I mean, it's important to maybe talk a little bit about Spat Terminus, because that's, we weren't Spat Terminus then, but
yeah, of course.
Monmouth Coffee were, just further down on Maltby Street.
Yeah.
And they, on Saturdays, started opening up. Neil Yard would put a trestle table outside selling some cheese. Monmouth Coffee would sell some coffee. Joan Scotter would sell some Fernvera vegetables, and that was probably about it. There was like 3 tables outside Monmouth Coffee. And then we opened up our arch, which was like 100 meters away on Saturday morning, as the predecessor to what, we do now at Spa. And then we all moved down in 2012 is when we opened in our current premises. So we didn't have a tap room at that point. So we just opened up the front of the brewery, put out some benches, poured some beer. It was great. But then as the other breweries started opening around 2011, 2012, so by the time 2015 came along, there were so many people coming down on a Saturday that it just wasn't, like, it became an experience that we did not want to give a customer. Like if I'd come down, I wouldn't go drink there. It was like, it was too busy, it's too crowded. No matter what we did, we could have 10 people working and there'd be a 20-minute wait for beer. And we were the only place that actually even had proper toilets. All the others are like just portaloos on the street. So the whole thing was just, and the neighbors obviously didn't like it because there's lots, So we closed our tap room down in 2015. So we just sold bottles to take away. And we didn't open it up till we were in Arch 9, or Arch 7, sorry, next door to where you are, which we only took over that space in 2019. So we had 4 years of not running a tap room because we couldn't run it the way we felt it should be done. And it was only when we got a new space to put it in, then it made sense.
So that's another reason.
We have an ambiguous relationship with that beer mile, because it when anything gets too popular, it's not the fault of that thing, is it? But the way popular culture works, when things get jumped on, most things can't handle. So it's like the beer mile, the breweries down there can't handle that volume of people coming down on a Saturday. And also it would just become a focus for stag do's, for football groups, for it just became a very party oriented space. They weren't really paying that much attention to what they were drinking, which is a shame, because we want people to we want to chat we want to talk about beer to people. We're all beer geeks. It kind of it lost that feeling. I mean, COVID then interrupted it, so now it's a bit different. It's a bit more chilled, but Saturdays are still quite busy on the beer side of things.
So when you were next door with the tap room still last year, I mean, you guys were busy on a Saturday. It was busy. It was always busy. But
Yeah, but
busy. It wasn't. You know,
busy. But COVID, they were busier. Pre-COVID, COVID did slow everything down a bit. Not in a bad way for that, at least for us.
tell me a bit more in that case, Evin. So okay, so you created your first kind of brewery, sharing a space, which makes sense actually. That's a nice kind of collaborative, I guess, with the other two guys setting up in one arch, and then you started selling beer on the Saturday, which I guess was your primary income, direct to people on a Saturday. But at what point you must have started then selling to pubs, bars. You must have, at some point you must have either realized the potential to actually kind of get it to a broader scale, or maybe people were coming to you for that. At what point did you start having more of a focus on selling the product to?
No, it actually worked the other way around. We only opened up on Saturdays after about 8-9 months. The focus was always on.
In the beginning, you actually go,
Yeah.
to
No, yeah. I suppose again from working in cheese, I knew how to sell food into shops and delis mostly. I didn't know anything about pubs. Didn't really necessarily know anything about running a pub or running a bar myself. And also we weren't.
rather than actual pubs or even restaurants. It was more actually to physical stores selling your bottled beer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the first 2 years as well, we only bottled everything. We didn't do any kegs, so it was just all bottles because I suppose that's sort of the market I knew. Also, I think that it kind of seems completely obvious now that selling beer directly to a customer is a thing, but that also did not exist before we did it. A tap room did not exist really, and we stumbled into it. Like I said, Neil Jard and Monmouth opened up a stall on a Saturday. So we opened up a stall on a Saturday selling bottles to takeaway. And then people started asking, can I have a cold bottle to drink here? And they were like, yeah, sit out there, have a beer, And then a couple of years later, you have hundreds of people outside all drinking beer. And it's like, where did that come from? It wasn't planned. But now, you can't open a brewery without a tap room. But at that point in time, I don't think it was necessarily obvious. And we, stumbled into it. We were selling bottles. Why are you selling bottles to somebody who's sitting just there? Put a beer in a keg and give them a fresh pour. So it took us a long time to even understand that. And that's, I suppose, one of the things that's changed drinking in this country is drinking in a tap room has become there's so many around, and they become, quite an interestingly different experience to drinking in a pub. I mean, I love pubs.
Yeah.
But the way different breweries have set up their tap rooms are, they're different. They're welcoming to different types of people. They're kind of more open in different sort of ways. They can be more family friendly, for example. They can generally maybe serve more food and things like that. So it's really changed the way people drink, which is good. But I think it is quite important to say that the tap room selling beer directly to customers makes sense now. But at that point in time, it wasn't that obvious. And also, we're tucked away in a railway arch in Bermondsey. I mean, you see the beer mile now, but like nobody would come down there. It was, it was dark, dingy, dirty, and miles away from anywhere. Although it wasn't miles away. I mean, that's obviously one of the reasons we moved there is because you're actually pretty close to the center of London.
Yeah.
But the rents at that time were, they were peanuts, and this was just a derelict stretch of industrial sort of wasteland heading out southeast from London Bridge. So the idea that anybody would even come out there is kind of almost, I'm in awe of Monmouth and Neil's Yard, thinking that their customers, would not go shopping at the Borough Market. They would come out here. It felt like who'd come out here. I think one of the things that really helped us, our batches were really small at the beginning. We made 500 liters of beer at a time, so it's pretty small. But like the first batch of beer we made, I think Neil Jard basically bought most of it and gave it out to their customers as a Christmas present, in their little hamper. So, when they might give them a bottle of beer and some cheese to all of their customers. Because I knew a lot of those customers from, they'd be delis and restaurants, basically mostly delis and restaurants. I didn't know any pubs. I didn't have any connections there. Hence not doing any keg beer and stuff like that. That's how it started. But after that, it was just word of mouth, because we were just, that bit ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Anybody who had any vague interest in beer would hear about us soon enough. And if they were that sort of persuasion, they would just come and ask us for beer. And most of the time we didn't have any, because we were tiny and
Yeah, right.
we didn't do any kegs or casks. We just did bottles.
Yeah.
But it was definitely, there was more than enough for us to, just to pick and choose who we sold beer to. So until we didn't hire our first salesperson until like 2019. So we were going 10 years without a sales goal. Just people would call up and ask for beer, and that would be it.
That's quite a transition, right? So you've gone from literally sharing an arch with a couple of other traders in an area that really was not popular or even very nice at the time. And then fast forward on to now, and you've created obviously quite, I see you guys load up every morning. There's an enormous amount of volume that gets made. Vans get filled up every single morning, multiple vans. I see your guys with the forklift. It's a busy operation. You guys produce a hell of. So when did you go from this kind of like, small operation, I guess, into this kind of like operation that is today? And also, it seems to me like you've not ever really focused your energy on growth to the point of like Brewdog. Let's say Brewdog was obviously, his exponential kind of growth was very high, very quick, right? And for you, it's almost like you've kind of like purposely remains on a kind of more steady path of growth to, like you say, kind of pick and choose your customers. I guess you've kept a lot of integrity within your own industry, right? You've always been more selective about your growth. You've not been blinded by the turnover, and the growth from an aggressive kind of financial point of view. It seems to me that you've always kind of taken a path of controlling, I guess, what it is that you're doing and who you're selling to, and how and where and why you operate the way that you do. And yeah, so tell me more about that. What is it that, like, looking at your business today, what is it that what's your ethos? What is it that your goal is or was, and why have you arrived to the point in which you're at today? You know what I mean? And was that your intention all along? What is it that you wanted to do? Did you want to become something that was just more specialist, or did you want to create this movement, if you like, with the craft beer side of things? What is
7 questions in one already. That's a lot to take apart. There isn't really. There isn't. I've never been good at plans, like master plans or 5-year plans or things like that. It's nice to grow and evolve, but you might change your mind, or things might happen, or whatever. Something like COVID comes along and everything changes. I suppose we do have we try. Then we have some principles and values that we try and adhere to, I suppose, in terms of how we treat our customers, how we treat our beer, how we treat each other. And I find that I suppose my thinking is that if you get to a certain scale of business, it gets harder to treat other people or your product that you're producing as well as you should do. There is there's a sense of scale that once you get to a certain scale, it's harder to. I find it harder for a company, for example, for the people to interrelate in a healthy manner if the company gets too big. But that's just the problem is, if you get to that stage, then it's already too late. It's hard to know where that point would be. I mean, one of the interesting and helpful things for us again about Brewdog is that because of the way that they grew, which was fascinating and admirable in a business sense, at least, I think it expanded the scope for other breweries. It's like, even if we didn't want to follow Brewdog's model, you kind of could realize that you probably could think a bit bigger than you were, or just have the option of considering that you could get bigger.
Yeah.
Which was actually kind of helpful. Like you can, you don't have to be tiny and small to be significant, or you can be. We're not a tiny brewery, as you pointed out, but we're still small in the grander scheme of things.
And so, explain to me in that case, and what is the ethos, and describe more, I guess, do you have like a hierarchy in your company? Like, what's your kind of structure? What, you know, how does that operate? Like, from you being at the top down, what, did you create what you've got, or is this what you've kind of ended up with, kind of subliminally, if you like? Was there much thought that went into behind creating what you've got now, or is it pretty much a default of all of the events that led you to today, if that makes sense? Is this something that you purposely created, or is this something that you've kind of ended up with over time?
But whatever sort of plans and conceptions that you might have, reality will come along and feed in something else that you need to deal with, which will change your plans. We started off with a really flat structure with not really any roles or hierarchy. So the first sort of 10 years, I suppose, everybody did everything, basically. So everybody could brew, everybody could bottle, everybody could drive the forklift, everybody could answer the telephone, everybody could put together orders, and people would rotate. And this was intentional between different things so that there was, the intent was to try and foster a feeling of equality. And that actually worked for quite a long time. But I think the main thing is, also, I suppose the people that I've been working with, now there's 6 of us who've been there since the brewery moved. So there's 6 of us who've been there since 2012. But in the earlier days, I suppose when we were only 12 people, everybody had been there basically since the beginning and was there for probably 6 or 8 years. So the fact that we all went through this growth together meant that we could all fit into this system together. And I think what happened about 5 years ago, maybe a bit more, was that some people did leave, as happens. I don't think we'd really planned for that, but it's fine. But then when new people came in and they didn't have the history of the last 8 years with us, we weren't ready to be able to train them into what they needed to know because it was all just ingrained in the way we worked. So basically we had no systems because everybody understood everything because everybody lived through that growth. And then we got to this point and it's like, why do you do things this way? And this because we've always done things this way. And it's really hard to explain that to somebody new if you haven't given it proper thought. So it's kind of since then, basically, we've had to build systems that are a little bit more friendly and approachable for people who've come from the outside. But it's still, it's still one of those things. We still have people who've been here for, 13, 14 years who just
How many people do work?
can't.
How many employees do you have?
There's 18 in the brewery and 5 in the tap room. So
Okay, so 23.
3.
Yeah.
And
what is your ethos?
but
If you were to describe, or I tell you what, if your team were to describe the ethos, what are the 3 things they would say about that? The culture, if you like. What is it that makes the Kernel Brewery what it is for its team and how they perceive it? And I guess that's what holds them there, isn't it? So, what do you think that?
I can't speak for them. I suppose what we're trying to do is just to make. Well, there's 2 things. If you focus on, making the best beer you can, so you're making the best product that you can, then it just gives you a sense of, if you feel like you succeed in doing that, then your reward in the sense of that you've created something really fucking delicious is, it's huge.
Yeah.
That just brings a level of satisfaction, I suppose. Pride. I feel that. Yes, pride. I feel that, constantly.
I know it's a bad order to get at it, so in order to get a financial reward, isn't it? I think
No, it's actually,
it's like
so I think those sort of things, I think I hope that if we do our jobs properly and well, then things like that financial reward will come.
yeah,
But that to us that's a result of us working properly. It's not the goal. At least I suppose maybe that's one way of asking your question. But in order to get to that, you really have to care about what you do.
yeah,
So you have to care about the beer, but you also have to care about your team because, if you're the sort of person who's helping your teammates out and you're, tidying up after somebody, or you're looking after what they need as well as, and they're looking after what you need, then, you have the same respect that you're giving to the beer, you're giving to, the guys you're working with, the girls you're working with. Then if you can make that work, then it's basically a way of, if it's trying to give each action a certain meaning, I suppose, to us. Like we could automate the whole process and have, you can buy brew houses that, would mash in from, you can mash in from your iPhone and have the whole process done by automated machines. Our process is completely manual. We load things physically. We dig out the mash done physically. We scrub the inside physically. We transfer things on off physically. So our brains are engaged, our hands are engaged, our senses of smell and taste are engaged at all times, which is really old fashioned and kind of ridiculous in a certain way. But it just means that there's meaning to every action. So is this a choice? One of the reasons because like if we could pay a brewery down the road to brew beer for us and sell that at a much, we could make loads of money doing that. But then that has no meaning to us. That if we did that, we would lose that connection to the beer we made, because we actively seek that specific connection. At least I do. And so that's why I hope that the team feels that focus on what we do as a process, which goes back to the beginning of the conversation about fermentation. You have to be there to see all those stages of the process through as a brewer to understand what's going on. And I think, we feel we taste that in our beer, that level of care and attention. And I suppose overall as a company ethos is that same care and attention has to be given to the other people that you're working with, so that, we are all caring, I suppose. So all the decisions that we try and make when it comes to the brewery as a business are usually in terms of looking after the people and looking after the beer and making sure they're as good as they can be. And then, if we feel that if we do that properly, then the financial should follow. That if we make good beer, people will want to buy it. It's simple as that. Rather than making decisions for a financial reason, which might then change the quality of the beer. So I think that is one of the things that I think, amongst the team is clear enough that the decisions are made for what's best for them and for what's best for the beer, and then we work from there.
And do you have with 23 people in your team, for example, our team is only about 13 or 14, I think, at the moment. And, we struggle sometimes with, let's say, HR stuff, like, because it's almost like you've got a big enough team that you kind of require infrastructure from a kind of administrative and managerial level. But at the same time, we're small and we can't really afford or justify to invest a lot in that. So, and this interests me a lot about kind of small, medium businesses like ours, is that, how do you manage that? Because
Sadly, yeah, that's it. I mean, I'd say it's most of the stress that I carry is that question.
the
HR question. They're just manage. So people are, there's two things. If you have people in your team who do not get along that well, then managing that can be constantly difficult. And on the other hand, there's also, I think we're quite close to each other as a team, which really means that if somebody is having a tough time outside of work, as a human being, I want to be there to listen to that. But it can be really heavy to, people are going through really hard times, and they're bringing that energy into work, which can be hard, but you can't just tell them to leave it at the door, But then it does affect, it affects you, it affects, maybe they can't come into work for a while, maybe, there's all these things which, and, if you really care about them, then, knowing somebody's going through something hard is, it just carry around with you or whatever. And when you have 25 people, then there's a lot of that. And like, there's always somebody's always in them, which is okay.
business, Evin, are you the go-to person? So when it comes to people, the kind of HR management support hierarchy, are you ultimately the go-to person for when your staff come to you with a problem, or when there is a problem? Do you have someone in your management structure that is there a buffer between your team and you, or is that
there is? But I think so. For example, in the tap room, we have a manager in the tap room, and the manager, Becky, there will deal with anything that happens in there. But I think you do generally need to have a HR person who is not your manager, in case, for example, you have a problem with the manager, or all those situations. And we don't have that person, so that extra person in most situations would be me.
Yeah,
which is kind of fine. But I know I don't usually have to deal directly with everything.
Yeah.
But again, these are people I've worked with for, as I said, there's 6 of the team here who've been here 12 years. So, that we will talk anyway about everything all the time because, we don't, it's when you have that much of a history in those sort of situations, you don't necessarily follow it.
Curious about this particular kind of subject as well, because I think like when you are a small kind of medium business, it's like, so I like to understand really well how businesses deal with, for example, HR side of things and other things as well. Like, because it's like you're small enough to not be able to afford necessarily certain luxuries, if you like, that bigger businesses have, but you're also big enough that you can't afford not to have some of that. And it's just it's such a difficult place to be sometimes as a small, medium business, because you're kind of in this pendulum where, you can't afford not to have it, but then you can't really afford to have it either. So it's like, how do you juggle these kind of areas? And what are your kind of like main struggles, if you like, on a day-to-day basis? What parts of your business do you struggle? Not struggle in the sense that I don't want to put a negative tone on it, because it's all part of running a business. But what are the biggest challenges, I guess, that you face on a daily basis that are, in an ideal world, resolvable, if you like, if you were slightly larger or you had a bigger kind of admin team? What do you spend a lot of your time on that ideally you would?
I mean, so
Time.
right now, you're asking me this question right now. So I think going back to what we were talking about earlier about having a really flat structure, that's been changing into a slightly more organized structure so now we have a production team and a warehouse team, taproom team. They're all kind of separate entities, and they can now more function. I think that the beauty of a flat structure was that everybody looked after everything and everybody was collectively responsible for everything, which was kind of great.
Yeah.
But I think I didn't realize how much work that was for me, because if you don't have without that structure, all questions would have to come through me. Which, when you have a small business, is kind of how it works, and that's fine anyway. But as you say, you grow to a slightly more medium-sized business, and I suppose what I'm trying to do now is we're kind of getting there, but it's just to try and find ways of decisions to be made for all the day-to-day stuff in the brewery to not have to pass through me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And getting there is most of what I'm trying to do, is to find ways for everybody else to have the authority and the responsibility to make decisions, hopefully the right decisions, without me around. And that would be a nice place to be at, because then I can hopefully just use my time to go and help other people where they need help with, rather than me, just running around picking up the bits that fall between different departments, So that's where I am in the last few months. It's getting, that bit of the process has actually been really good.
Yeah.
I'm going away on holidays next week for a couple of weeks, and it's one of the first times, maybe the first time, that there's actually nothing. Well, there will be something goes wrong, of course, but there's no specific day-to-day tasks that aren't going to really be covered.
Yeah, I
usually see there was always a role that I might need to check.
order certain ingredients because no one knows.
Yeah. Exactly. Or there's a particular customer who has a particular request, who always likes it done this way, and somebody has to remind them because I'm the only one who remembers this, because that sort of thing. But most of that is now just moved off my plate. So maybe actually when I go away, I maybe can step further away than I have, which would be a bit weird, because there's also that, I'm sure you also feel, it's just a bit of nervousness, I suppose, the further back you step, whether things are going to be done where you hope they'll be done. And now, of course, you trust the team and everything's going to be fine, but at the same time, you're not there doing it. So is it going to happen in the right way?
Everything being centered from what you do or don't do or say or don't say. And, all this information is essentially in your mind, right? And that's why everyone comes to you, because there's not,
Yes.
you know what I mean? It's like and it's a lot of it's annoying, because it's not necessarily things you can train someone on, because a lot of it's actually reacting to a particular problem that might arise that only your knowledge may resolve. So to try and kind of like extract this way of processing these issues, problems, processes, systems, or whatever is very, very difficult, because until it happens, you don't really know how to implement it.
Yep.
So what do you do? How have you managed to kind of get to the point where you're at now, where you feel like, yeah, you can finally take some time away without thinking, oh shit, like,
No, I think I mean, I think most of it, it might be, I don't feel I'm a control freak, but there is a little bit of, there's a little bit of that actually the team are much better able to deal with it than maybe I think they are.
okay. So what
And
micromanage kind of,
maybe I do that a bit, but also I think is sometimes I wonder, well, what would my role be if I didn't do that? What's my value to the company? How am I actually, like actually fixing a really small problem makes me feel, oh, I've done something useful, but actually it was a really small problem. It was probably a waste of my time, you know. And maybe I'm just trying to avoid looking at the really big problems, that whatever it might be, you know, a HR issue or rewriting an employee handbook or something that needs doing, or there's all these other projects that are just kind of, that I have a couple of other big projects that are just on the back burner that I just don't get around to doing, big, which maybe I'm avoiding doing that by just fixing all these small problems.
so what,
Um,
that's actually a good point there as well, Evan, because we all are. So, for example, for me, I really don't, I don't actually enjoy managing people. I've come to learn that actually it's not something I enjoy. I love people. I love my team. I love talking to them. I love the relationships. But I'm just not very good, I don't think, at managing people properly. And by that, I mean creating robust systems, implementing them, checking them, training people, like, anyway, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm becoming more aware over time about what are my strengths, because like you say, I will naturally gravitate towards the things that I'm good at, but then I'm leaving behind important things because I don't particularly like it. And kind of like subconsciously, probably, I'm just kind of like trying to avoid those tasks, but I'm trying to be better than myself, and trying to realize, okay, well, what are the tasks that I'm not so good at and I don't enjoy? And what can I do from them to delegate out so that actually they get done and they don't get brushed under the carpet and they get done properly. And then I can concentrate on the things I actually enjoy and I do really well at. And that's the kind of process I'm going through right now, is to really kind of uncover. And it's difficult because you've got to really go in to not only yourself but your business, and talk to your team, and you're very honest, and that's not easy. Um, So yeah, so I'm unpicking, if you like, my day to day, and I'm rebuilding it in a way that's like, okay, well, look, why I don't need to do this task. I don't like it. It stresses me out. I'm not very good at it because I don't want to do it. So who's good at that task? Okay, well, actually, they're really good at these kind of things. Right, great. Let me train you on that one. You can take care of that. Great. What are the other things I'm really good at? That. Okay, is there anyone else that can do it better than me? No, brilliant. I'll focus my energy more on that. So do you do anything like that? Do you have the same kind of internal dialogue, if you like, of trying to understand better? Because, like what you said, is like I almost feel guilty when I'm not involved in everything. I almost feel like, what if my team thinks I'm being lazy, or I'm just sitting at home doing? No, I mean, I always feel guilty. I work 24/7, but a lot of my work is not necessarily action of small tasks. It's
yeah.
about problems. It's thinking about opportunities, projects, how to do this, how to better that, how to, or like how to create a new product, how to sell it, what kind of new customer could I approach about selling fish, and anyway, so that's all work, but it's very easy to kind of almost discredit your own uh,
Um,
part in the business, because you're no longer so involved in the detail that you feel like you're, yeah, well, I think I know what I'm trying to say, because you said something that spurred me on to say what I just said. So do you feel like that as well? Do you feel like, yeah, the kind of almost the more you let go of, um, the more you feel almost like, yeah, inadequate about it, almost like it's hard to let.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, a little bit, but I'm not quite at that stage yet. So, but I'm no, I think that I think there's a space out there when you can let go of those, either the small little tasks that are just annoying, or the ones that you don't really enjoy yourself. I think that once you had time in that new scenario, you would find very engaging and useful ways of spending that time. I'm not too worried about that. I suppose for me, I have, like, for example, like on the brewery side, my fingers are everywhere and I'm stuck in all these bits. What's been kind of educational for me is the tap room. So since the tap room opened up, well, the first one, and now it's moved, it's a massive, big thing that's really busy. It's loads of people in there all the time. It's got 5 full-time employees, and then, the kitchen's got 2-3 people. It's a really big deal. And they don't bother me in the slightest. And I don't bother them because I have no experience with tap rooms. I mean, I come in and check out and see what's going on, but they run everything. Becky runs everything without me having to do anything, really. I mean, some of the big questions we'll chat about, and any big investments that need doing. So at least part of me can see that I can be involved in something that I don't deal with anything in. And I actually, I mean, I still have the brewery, so it's not like I feel completely useless, but I can go into I go into the bar and sit down and, chat to people. There's nothing in there that brings me any stress, but I don't actually have any responsibilities there. And I actually don't even know most of how it works, really. So it's nice to have that picture. It's like, oh, okay.
Well,
I can still I could be here, come in and chat to Becky for a couple hours a week, and then the tap room doesn't need any more from me,
Do you not think that it's because of the 15 years or so experience or not?
Oh, yeah, maybe.
It's like, it's because it's almost like a new thing. And because you're applying, 2 decades of experience that you've actually,
but
learned to just, I don't know, you've created it in a way that is run like that because of your experience rather than by some accident. Clearly, because you've set up a tap room before, you built this place from scratch. Process.
Yeah. I mean, the building and stuff I was involved with, but the actual running and the day-to-day and how the tills work and how a shift works and who needs to do what. And like there's all the day-to-day stuff that is actually to do with, I've never worked in a bar and I've never run one. So that is just about getting the right person in who can do that job better than you. So in these cases, it's like, Becky and Moritz, you look after customers, you run the bar, and I trust them to do it. But you're right. I mean, there's certain, having a bit of history does allow you to, well, it hopefully helps you to pick the right people, which is obviously one of the important things. And obviously whatever the brewery brings along with it, the reputation, the beers, and our history as a brewery does give the tap room, certain advantages, I suppose. But it does exist in a way that I don't really need to be involved, which is interesting for me.
And it must feel nice as well, though, right? It must be quite nice to kind of have created this baby that is now, pretty capable of.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah. No, it is. It's great.
And what kind of, I guess another one out, because I talk to many business owners that still kind of, I talk to such a broad range of business owners in different formats, different kind of conversations, but from the kind of people that run businesses like ours that still use pen to paper for a lot of their kind of management, if you like, ordering, processing, all this kind of stuff, and other people that use, the latest kind of systems technology to streamline their systems. Like, where do you sit on that? Are you still?
That's a very good question. You're asking very good questions here. So, one of our team is a programmer.
Oh,
so, and Chun's been here. Chun from the front desk. Chun might have been here from almost the very beginning. Chun programs. So when we moved to Spa Road 12 years ago, Chun built our operating system. So we built a in-house system that monitors ingredients. Then it's got brew sheets, so it monitors the brewing, fermentation. Then turns all that when we package it into bottles, kegs, warehousing. Then becomes our sales thing where we send out invoices from it. So we built that ourselves.
Wow.
It's called Cheddar because we name everything after cheese. Cheese is the origin of everything. It's fucking amazing. But the problem is because Chun and I built it, Like Chun would ask me what I want, I'd tell him, and it would happen. It makes perfect sense to only me,
Okay.
and even not to me sometimes. So that's one of the conversations we've been having recently about, one of the reasons I'm stuck in everything is because our system, like all the information is there, but to get from this bit of information to that bit of information requires me to know where to go. They're not like always linked.
Yeah.
So, and basically there's also probably, because it's not a perfect system,
Yeah.
there's also like 12 years of errors that we haven't really corrected. So, there's like these little things that keep accruing. So now there's little piles of debris in the corners that we just keep ignoring because we don't know how to fix that problem. But like you say, when you've been doing this job for this long, you know the ways around, and you know how to fix that problem, and you know how it all works. But it's not an organized system as such.
Yeah.
So there is a question of, we have been looking at other, systems. Because the other thing as well is, off the shelf systems that we could buy, they might tie in with your accounting software, or with ordering software, or with filing your tax return software, whatever other stuff you might need. They'll be all integrated if you bought an off the shelf system. But we have been working with one off the shelf system, and we can't get it to answer the questions that we want to ask it.
Yeah.
Like, we have really weird ways of doing things, and they're really important to the brewery. But then the new systems just can't. They don't know how to handle it, because it's like,
Which system are you talking about, Evan?
oh, well, this is called Brew, so it's a specific brewing software.
Oh, okay.
But it will manage everything from your ingredients to your brewing to your warehousing to your sales. It does exactly what ours does, but it's been built it's been built for ease of use, so anybody could use it. It looks much prettier. It does all this,
But it's still
and whistles and stuff. No, but we do things in really weird ways that just like there's mental processes that we've created because we built our own system that they aren't linear, and they're not the way that these guys are thinking. So it's just a different language, and there's always words in certain languages that just don't translate. So like if we change system, we'd have to change the way we work completely. And that actually that's an existential question. So it might make things easier. Maybe it's not a big deal, but also it's like, okay, well, we can't do that anymore. Then, right. Well, yeah. It's just, it would be, the way we think about ourselves would change. So it is quite,
So it sounds
we've
like
been looking at it. We haven't made the decision to switch yet, though. We still like our old system. It's brilliant.
I question that as well, like, Evan, because that's another one I find interesting. Again, is because you touched on before that you got someone that does your sales, but who processes incoming sales? And do you actually have an active kind of business development person? And does that person input the sales manually? How do people order? How do you put them on the system? Once they're on the system, how does your packing team know about them? What's that kind of process look like?
So we have 3 guys in the front desk. So our customers order by email or telephone,
And then what?
and they'll deal directly with the packing team. So the packing team will take the phone call. In our system, Cheddar will type in the order, find the customer on there, type in the order, schedule for what day our delivery drivers are going in that area, and they'll put that together whenever it needs doing for that next day. So all the guys at the front know, they know all of our customers. They know when they're going to go out. New customers tend to come through the sales team. So there'll obviously be a conversation about, what somebody needs and what they want. Most people who get in touch with us, though, generally have a good idea of what they need already.
I do find that you like, because this is another funny one for my business, is like, we're trying to obviously streamline the ordering process as much as we can without losing that contact with the customer. How do your orders come in? Is it mostly by phone?
No, we choose to annoy people as much as possible.
Oh, so you're chasing them for orders, basically?
No. The opposite. We choose to not let them have an easy ordering process. They have to call and talk to us or send us an email.
Why?
The human contact.
Okay.
That's more important than having an easy sale to us.
How do you struggle with?
I'm not interested. I hate ordering on an app. It's the worst thing imaginable.
Okay.
I'm not very good at talking to people on the phone either, but sending an email is easy. Yeah. Like, it's usually Chun who answers the email, and it's usually Chun who's answered that email for the last 12 years. That means a lot to a person. Even if Chun is quite taciturn and probably doesn't chat very much, but the fact that they still know that Chun is answering that email is like, oh, yeah, 10 years later, Chun is still there answering that email.
Yeah.
That means a lot. And that represents a lot about how we work, I think. Yeah, we have a lot of customers, not a lot actually, because we discourage it, but they order through sort of, a lot of restaurants have ordering stock level control apps, which will then, trigger
Like
ordering more
orders,
beer, when those sort of things. Yeah. The various different F&B, whatever's. We did, some of our customers use those.
And do you
But
find
also, I mean, the thing is that we also, because of, even though we might have, we have pale ales available every week, we also change the hops in them every week. So there's always a question of, everything's going to be slightly different. So there's always a need, not always, but there's often a need to run things by a customer. So, the ones that order through an automatic ordering app or whatever, they're just really hard to get an answer from if there's ever anything that's not quite the way it should be. And there's always issues. So yeah, we actively prefer just to speak to a human being on the phone or to respond to a human being on the email.
like, so your sales team, and do you still actively seek new customers? Are they actually like reaching out to new customers, or are you at a point in your business where actually you can only produce X and you're already, your demand is more than your supply? So, are you, what are you in a position where you've got enough being produced for the customers you have and you can't make any more? Or are you in a position where you're like, well, actually, we could produce more, we could get more customers, so let's try and get more customers? You know what I mean? Like, at what point are you at this?
I mean, so before COVID, we were pretty full. And then, we were okay. We survived through COVID and all that. But obviously the years after, I think everybody expected things to improve slightly, certainly in the hospitality trade. And, all the other various things, people not coming back to pubs so much, or restaurants, war in the Ukraine, and, cost of living crisis and everything has meant that until last year, we didn't kind of pick up to where we were before. So I suppose we were like 10-15% down on what we were before COVID. So about a year and a half ago, we kind of changed sales focus a bit to bring us back up to capacity. So we're kind of pretty much at capacity now. So, we're back up to our pre-COVID capacity. We maybe have a touch more capacity depending on what type of beers are being requested. We don't do too much. We haven't been going around looking for new customers too much.
We're not that on the next question. So what does your, what is the next chapter at the Kernel Brewery look like there? So what, if you're saying you kind of reached capacity from a production point of view, you've just set up the tap room, which is fantastic place, really busy all the time, really nice atmosphere there. You got two great businesses almost like running simultaneously, right? So what's the next step? What is it that you foresee for the Kernel in the future? Like, what is it that, is it, are you wanting to grow more the production? Are you wanting to maybe increase the number of tap rooms you have, or are they starting different projects? Or is it now a case of just kind of like streamlining a bit better where you're at, taking yourself too much away, a little bit more away from the day-to-day kind of tasks? What is it that you're looking for now? Like, what is the next kind of like 2 to 5 years look for you?
Yeah, I don't, as I said at the beginning, I don't really have very good 2-year, 5-year plans. But I think if I'm this process of taking myself a bit more out of the day-to-day and giving more responsibility and accountability to the rest of the team, where my focus is now. There's maybe a touch of capacity to play with, but not much. I don't know what. There are possibly ways of expanding our capacity by a little, but they're a lot of work. So if we get to our capacity, then we'll kind of analyze that. But also, I suppose once we get to capacity, we can also look at where we are selling things. Some, say the margin to certain customers might be better than to other customers. So we could, focus more on London and maybe less on wholesale. And maybe that would be a way of just, picking and choosing again who we sell to, which might have its own benefits.
Absolutely.
I mean, the tap room is, because it's so close to the brewery, it's just, it's ideal. I can't quite envision one somewhere else, but I wouldn't rule it out in the, maybe at some point.
And what about
because you kind of realize how much of a benefit it is to a brewery to have a place where, I mean, it's obvious. That's why you have lots of big breweries who own lots of pubs, because you can sell your own beer through those pubs, and that's a pretty good way of making all that work.
Absolutely.
But I can't quite picture if it's something that would not be just adjacent to the brewery. And if it would feel lonely wherever it might be.
And
maybe I could build one next door to my house. Then I wouldn't have to. Then it wouldn't be lonely.
Yeah, right. And what because I think social media wise, I think I was looking you up on Facebook, and you have an unofficial page on Facebook, which I guess means you've never really set up a page on Facebook. It's something that's come out as other people creating this kind of page, because there's no
Facebook does that. Facebook creates a page for you if you don't create. Yeah.
But Instagram,
I don't know what it says.
Instagram, we do have a page, and you got, I think, about 20,000 followers, which is great. Do you do much actively on there? Is there anyone that's actually like in charge of it? Like, because social media management, to me, I personally, I hate social media. I can't stand it. I can't involve with it. But it's so bloody important these days to kind of like communicate, your brand and your products and your ethos and I guess who you are, right? So, that's one thing I've really struggled with in the past. What do you do about that?
I struggle with the same thing you do. But then if your message that you want to, send on social media is how much you hate social media, then that's not a good look either. I don't understand. I'm too old to understand social media or to engage with it properly. So my default has been not to say anything. But I mean, so we do have a brewery account, which G will put up a post once a week, generally about whatever beer we have coming out next week. It's pretty boring.
Yeah,
but I mean, there is a different level of like just telling people what's out there. That's not social media in terms of engaging with your customers properly, and that's kind of fine with me. I don't know how any of us could do that without it being a full-time job, and I don't really feel like we're that sort of thing to give somebody a full-time job answering social media messages.
No, it's the same for us. Like online as well as another one. I mean, you sell online, right? So people like public can buy from your website, and you.
Yep.
Again, do you have anyone like actively kind of doing promotions or doing email marketing? Like, is that an area that you?
Yeah. So with the G who runs the online shop, and she does all the packing and stuff too. She does the Instagram posts, and we've only just started doing a monthly mailing letter thing, but it's pretty low key.
No, it's
I don't mind low key. It kind of, as long as everything ticks along.
Is that a big area? It's actually, we haven't really talked about that, but do you have many people buying online, like the public?
Surprising amount. Yeah.
Do you do a day or a week on direct to customers? And who do you use actually? Who do you use to deliver? Because we've struggled a lot with couriers. Like,
it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Currently we use DPD, but it's via a third party who are.
Oh, really?
Well, the third party at least answer the phone, and they can't necessarily fix the problem, but they're nice people to talk to. Because, obviously you can't really ever get through to the company you need, can you?
They were just a nightmare. We'll speak to anyone. It's awful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I think we've cycled through many other different couriers, and they know.
Yeah.
I would obviously give you some good advice if I had any.
And for your London deliveries then, you must have a lot of customers that order, B2C, I mean, like to residential addresses. Do you have many in London, or is it mostly outside?
At the online shop, maybe 30% London, I might guess. But I could be wrong about that.
And do you big as well for that, or do you send your own vans for the deliveries within London?
That depends. I think the smaller orders more often would go with DPD, just because they're easier for dealing like with a single small box. Where it's a larger order, we'll usually send our vans. But yeah, it depends.
Same problem we have. It's like, it's exactly the same problem we have. It's such a difficult one to navigate, because I mean, the thing about London is at least there's more infrastructure to be able to find ways to get things to people. But at the same time, we find increasingly that driving in London is just a pain in the ass. Your drivers get fines probably at least once a week. You know, they think, bloody hell, like, out of your hard-earned wages, you know, you're spending X amount on bloody fines. And they're good drivers. They're not. I mean, they're very careful, but I think it's quite stressful to drive in London. But I choose not to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Likewise.
So I mean, that was kind of like, I guess, the gist of what I wanted to go through. But to kind of
Nice.
close the podcast, which has gone on a lot longer than I expected, actually. But I guess we both like talking. You know, what advice? This is something I was kind of like. I think I asked you that the other day. If you were talking to yourself, you know, back at that point where you kind of decided to do what you're doing now, you know, what advice would you give yourself back then?
I mean, I don't think I think we've been pretty lucky along the way. So I don't feel that there's anything that I really missed. I mean, yeah, things could have been different, but I feel they've gone pretty well for us. So I'm not like feeling that I missed out on anything. We could have gone a little bit more organized, a bit more efficiently, earlier on in the process, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like I was saying with our system, we built up so many bits of rubbish and mess and chaos that, fixing all that now is
much harder, right?
a big, yeah. But, did we ever want to be super efficient and organized from the beginning? Yeah, it might be nice, but it probably would have stressed us out in different ways. So,
Yeah, that's the thing.
but it's hard
Hindsight
to know.
thing.
Yeah.
And what, to all these kind of like younger, or not necessarily young, I mean, people start businesses any age these days, but, if you were giving advice to anyone starting out, I guess in the food industry in particular, what if someone came to you and said, listen, Evin, I'm thinking of starting X business, what advice would you give that person in the first instance?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, most advice is very specific to what they want to do. But I mean, I don't know, the thing that I appreciate or would like other people to appreciate is about thinking in the long term. Because so many decisions, especially business decisions, are made because you're really worried about something happening now. But, if you imagine your business is still going to be here in 5 years' time, that decision is made differently in the present, I feel. So it's kind of like, it's not, it's not about the immediate decision that sells this thing once, it's how do I sell this continuously for 5 years, I think so much of, especially on the selling side, especially with social media, it's about, whatever, getting traction, going viral. But those tend to be things that peak and then trough because you can't maintain concentration for that long. It's like, okay, I want people to enjoy my beer for, 16 years rather than drink a fuckload of it now and then get bored of it and move on to the next thing, which is kind of how that boom and bust cycle of selling things sometimes seems to work. And I'm more, I want to invest my money and my time and my care into something that's going to be here in 15 years. I mean, the on the flip side of the craft brewery world is so many of the breweries that, came along and slightly after our generation were built to sell to big breweries and have now gone on and become, mass market brands around the place. And the owners who were, friends of mine and people that I mentored a little bit and stuff like that, just take that thing that they built and I'll take all their customers' love and, flip it for X amount of money, which is, not surprising. This is kind of how business works, but, I'm not interested in that. And I really would like, to invest my time and care into something that's, going to be there generationally, preferably, that's what means something to me.
Well, that's the kind of another question for me was kind of the closing question really is, which for me, again, is a really interesting part of talking to business owners. Because what I've learned is that, everyone's got a different driver for running a business, right? So, everyone thinks that it's all about the profit. And of course, you need the profit in order to have a business in the first place, right? But, everyone has a different sweet spot on where that profit needs to be in order for that business to be okay. And then once you get to that, then it's almost like the real reason why you're running the business can actually kind of flourish, right? So for me, I guess running a business was about having freedom, like it wasn't necessarily about making money. Of course, making money, yes, but it's about freedom. For me, it's about working when I want to work. It's about not, I hate being fixed to a place or a time. I like to kind of freestyling. You know, if I feel a bit like not starting at 9 in the morning, that's okay. I can start at 11. If I want to work until 11 p.m. because I feel a bit you know, motivated kind of period, then great. And that's kind of always been my, or where I'm at now with businesses. I like to have that freedom to be able to make decisions and do things on a 24-hour clock as and when I want to do it. But to a lot of business owners, it's turnover maybe. Could be profit, could be, I don't know, the sheer love of the craft that they do, or the, who knows? What's your driver? What is it that kind of motivates you to run your, you know, what's motivating you to run the Kernel Brewery as it is now? You know, what is it that you get out of it on a personal level? What are your goals?
No, it's, I suppose I enjoy what I do because it to me, it's meaningful, you know, and I suppose in a small way, I'd like to think that the beer we make can, you know, just improve somebody's day a little bit, and that working at the brewery can improve people's lives a little bit. I mean, that would be nice to try and think how, you know, how we can all make the world a better place. I'm not saying we do that as a brewery necessarily at all, but think in the back of my mind, in the bigger picture, is how can we leave this world better than how we found it, which is a really interesting question to ask these days, considering the world around us. But I like to try and reflect on how what we do, and you know, through conversations like this, that we can, you know, have a positive impact on what goes around. And then to me, I suppose I'd like to try and think that gives my life some little bit of meaning in a positive sense, that I can anchor. You know, whenever I ask myself questions, what am I doing here? It comes down to, is this helping something?
Interesting. That's a nice, yeah, it's a nice way to put it, I guess, and a nice way to feel, I guess, nourished, if you like, from what you do. Nice.
Precisely.
Is there anything else that we maybe not talked about that you perhaps wanted to talk about or mention?
No, I don't think so. Talked about plenty, haven't we? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty more, but there's nothing significant, I would say.
Cool. Well, Evin, I really appreciate this first podcast. Yeah, I thought it was going to take us half an hour to 40 minutes, and here we are, an hour and 45 minutes later.
Okay.
I hope I won't take too much of your time, but I really appreciate it.
No, not at all. Yeah. Edit away as you feel necessary, if it's too long to fit.